Well, good morning. Good to see everybody. Well, today's Father's Day. A while back we talked about moms, and now we're going to talk about fathers. I've been so caught up in the series about the first steps, first things first, that it was like Thursday, and somebody said, "Oh, Father's Day's coming up," and I went, "Oh, yeah, that's right." So I said, well, we got to talk about fathers. And I think it's even more so important in our society today, where everybody seems to be arguing over what is a male, what is a female, what is a mother, what is a father, and who can have babies and who can't have babies, and all this is going on and how heated it becomes. And we'll probably have this YouTube. I'll get a strike on it because I'm somehow reflecting hate. So far, we've been pretty lucky. I mean, I think that we've been fortunate in a sense that at least we're being able to exercise our rights in religious expression so far. But it's very disturbing to me as a Christian, as a father, to have to listen to those even thoughts, considering that from the dawn of age, a father was a father, a mother was a mother, and it was understood. No matter what language you used, it was something that was understood. We've already, I think, in our society, starting from the 60s on, really started to see a breakdown of the family unit and just continuing to evolve through that. And then good people, all you have to do to let evil triumph is do what? Nothing. And unfortunately, we're living as a result of that attitude where good people, not just Christians, but I blame Christians as well, because we should be the ones that are carrying that light and people being able to look at us and us stand up for what is morally decent and right, and then allowing that to go on and have this attitude, well, that's okay, just as long as you don't bother me. Well, guess what? They're bothering us now. They're not only bothering us, they're attacking us. And it is a form of persecution. And right now, we can express certain things, but you know what? Who would have thought 20 years ago we would be having these discussions in our country today? I'm just as blown away. And every time I'd bring up this idea about the slippery slope, people used to laugh at me because years ago I would talk about the beginning of the decay as well was starting on a sitcom called Three's Company, about the moral decline and how that was really starting to open up a door, and everybody's going, come on, John Ritter, and I mean, that's just a funny show. I mean, it's just hilarious. I mean, I'm like, you're not seeing it. And I was very young too, so I mean, I'm not like I was all wise and stuff, but there was something there about this idea of a guy living with two women, none of them are married, and one's playing like he's gay. And I'm telling you, it was funny. It was. I enjoyed it. But there was something deep down that said, there's something a little wrong with that. And then the other one was the idea that, well, we'll look at Ozzie and Harriet. If you go back to that day when they were filming in Hollywood, Ozzie and Harriet, moms and dads, slept in twin beds. Did you ever notice that? Anytime they showed like a bedroom scene or something like that, the mom and dad, they slept in a twin bed. And another thing was in the contract, they had to sleep when they were laying down in that twin bed. They have to have 1 foot on the floor. Those were some days, huh? And we just look back and go, wow, that was just stiff-necked. I mean, they're just being so prudish. And I said the same thing about a lot. But now we kind of stand up and go, whoa, wait a minute. Now we're and that it's going to, I'm afraid it's going to take some generational changes, but we've got to come back and look at what God created. When you take God out of the equation, you can define anything you want, any way you want. The Bible called that idols. You create idols. And when you create an idol, it's something that you hold above or replace God, and you say, that's far enjoyable. But you know, the great thing about building an idol is it doesn't talk back to you. You can make it say anything you want. You can build it any way you want it to be. So maybe idols and things that we're bowing down before, but we have philosophies. We have an ideology. We have culture that we're worshiping. And one of the great ones is this attack on fatherhood that is very disturbing to me. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but back to the concept, understanding, it's simply a male. And so far, and I just Googled it too to make sure they hadn't changed it. This is what the dictionary says it is, because I'm serious. I thought, you know what, before you go get smart and say, well, the dictionary says that it's a male, I better go check. And at least as of Friday, the Webster Dictionary still says that a father is a male. Not only that, but it's a man who produces a child. Now that's not biblical, begotten. That word up there sounds very religious, but that's Webster. Begotten means you can produce a child. One, of course, but it's still the only other half that we need to look at. And, it's not something that we had a choice in. If we go back and we look in the Bible and we see that nature is in order, everything don't get out of haphazard. And that whole concept of the idea that somehow you can rearrange or you can reassign or you can surgically manipulate things and then still produce is against the entire history. You know what? It's even against evolution. So the very people who uphold this idea that you can redefine what a mom and a dad is and it doesn't matter is against themselves, because you see, evolution says if it can't procreate, it's removed. And so over the what they call millions of years of getting better and better and better and better, that's not getting better. Because until you do some serious alterations outside of it, it's not natural. It's not something that's improving the species of whatever mammal, fish, and especially with us, it's just not. It's not. Now I can hear all these people saying, well, it's not just the male. And you're absolutely right. But I want to hammer this point. In Genesis 1:27, very clearly, at the beginning, the creative order was God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male, female, he created them. Two aspects. The first one is there's a part of God himself in which we reflect. And we know that he's not male and he's not female, but there's a part of who we are, our spirit, the ability to love, the ability to know good from wrong, right from wrong. Those are things that spiritually, in the image, the spirit that we have from God that he created us in. Then he says here in verse 27 that he also then biologically placed that, and I'm kind of reading it, but he placed that image into a biological existence. And he did it male and female. Now, he could have very well created us asexual, and he could have created us like there are some in nature that are asexual and they can reproduce. And again, if you go to evolution, you would say, okay, if I believe in evolution and know God, then the fittest, best thing for that creature or animal, fish, whatever, to survive. But you notice that we didn't. It's only become a philosophical, a sociological idea and concept, but we're not evolving physiologically toward sexuality to where it doesn't matter and you can just reproduce. There's no gene, there's no missing link, not. And there's a whole purpose because, again, it's a part of the image of God. See, God is not a singularity. It's not just one. When you say God, and I'm really hacking away at the Hebrew, but basically you're using the word like them, us, they. It's plural. And that's why you'll hear even people pray a lot of times. They'll say, God Father, you heard that? God Son, God Spirit. Now, I can't wrap my mind around the whole Trinity thing and all that, but I'll tell you, what we see throughout all Hebrew scholars, all rabbis and stuff, understand that Elohim is in reference to a multiplicity of personalities that you can identify as unique and individual. And we have identified one as Father, and we have one identified that we can see character manifested himself. In the Old Testament, we can see him, but we see he's manifested in the flesh, God's Son. We see his workings of God's Spirit. So the three of them. So you could say they're a family. So when we're created in the image of God, he created us, two individuals, separate and independent, but we're also dependent on each other. And that was one of the greatest lessons that Adam had to learn. One of his first jobs was to do what? You remember? Name the animals. Well, that's an easy job. He got to pick out the names of the animals that we call them today. Horse, elephant. But by the time he got done with that job, you know what happened? He was thinking to himself, you know what? I'm one. I'm incomplete. I'm by myself. And I think God's going, right, absolutely, you're right. That's the whole part of this job. I could have given you the names, Adam. But I wanted you to fully comprehend this idea. With a female, or without a companion, let's just say. Let's keep that part out. A companion. And so that's one of the things. And so with that in mind, we know then he created a helper, a companion, not a servant, not a lord. And at the creative moment, they were completely equal. Stuff happened and changed and radically kind of moved things differently after sin. We can look at in some of the conversations because of what Eve did and stuff. But that's not the way God created. And we always have to remember that. Everything, as we go through this morning and we talk about fathers, I want us to remember that it's not God that made bad fathers. It's not a bad plan that God set up, a father and a mother, because of what we see is a resultant of sin, of what we have done. If we could have maintained, we would have had an amazing male, female, and children. It would have been incredible. It would have been an Eden within itself, of a family, of a union with ones we're creating. See, God can create too. And God gave us that beautiful ability to create. And he's the one that put it in place. You start messing with that, you get chaos. When you leave here, that's what you're going to step back into. It's chaos because of taking what God had established as good, as perfect, and beautiful, and peaceful, and turned it into chaos. And until we return back to these basic understandings, we're going to keep having chaos. Not that the families are perfect. One of the things, after he has established a male and a female, he gave him a command. He said, be fruitful, multiply. Be productive. Have children. I want the two of you to understand what it's like to create two individuals, two different types, in not only just the physical side, but the views had to be different. And in those different, the strength and power of one. Now, when you alter that again, according to your own personality, your own beliefs, you corrupt it, you get bad families, you get bad marriages, you get a broken family, all those things. But if you look at it, so as well, you were created a beautiful male and you were created a beautiful female. One should be minimized. And those differences is what's so beautiful and perfect. So that's what we look at this morning. But we have these different perceptions, don't we, of like dads, you know, like as we watch children grow up and you watch them, and especially now as a grandpa, now I'm watching my grandchildren as they're interacting with my sons, and it's hilarious, isn't it? It's kind of funny because you feel like you're getting revenge, you know, because you got, yeah, you did that to me too. So, you know, it's kind of giggle, don't you? You kind of, yep, heard that one before, and your son's sitting there going, I can't believe, and I'm going, believe it. I was there, you're there now. But one of the things that I thought was incredible, I was killed when I was 19. And it changed. It changed a lot of things. And some of these things were very interesting. And my observation were different. But these are truisms that we have heard, or if not, they represent a process as children are growing up. Some of the things that we see, like a 4-year-old, you know, how they look at their dad. You know, as we look at our fathers, as we grow older and our brains mature and we start life and we live life. You know, when you're 4 years old, you know what? Daddy can do everything, right? Man, he's like bulletproof, you know. Mom, she's the same way. She's got eyes behind her head. She's got all the, you know, that's the innocence of purity. And then finally around 8, as they're asking you all those questions, Dad doesn't know how the nuclear bomb works or how they did certain things. That's probably too hard a question for Nate to ask, but you know, slowly they start to realize, well, wait a minute, you know, maybe Dad doesn't know. But it starts to really change, doesn't it? Oh, well, naturally, Dad, he doesn't understand. And then 14, on father, he's hopelessly old-fashioned. And then 21, oh man, that old man, he's out of date. He just doesn't get it. What do you expect? And then 25, you know, that old man sometimes comes up with some good ideas. So it starts to kind of change. And 30, then it starts going, oh, I'm going to have to ask Dad. I think Dad might know. And then 35, hold on, slow down. You're telling yourself, slow down a little bit. Let's find out. Let's get Dad's opinion. Let's see what Dad would have to say. And then when you're 50, what would have Dad thought about that? I think about that all the time. You know, I think about my grandpa. I think about, you know, certain things when I'm studying the Bible and I have this great idea and realization about certain spiritual things, and I think about them. I go, I wonder what they would think about that. And then by 60, you're like, I wish I could talk to him again. You know, one more time. I wish I could have talked to him. And that's a natural process, you know, that we see going on. The thing that kind of got me when I was 19, I just turned 20. Yeah, I just turned 20. Was those who had fathers and their relationships that I knew that I was never going to have, that it was gone. And the anger that built up within me because I felt like an orphan. I mean, I had just hit the age, and maybe I was a little further ahead, instead of saying, he's so outdated, that I felt like I had finally grew up and my dad was not talking down to me as a child, but we were having adult conversations. And he's gone. And I felt like an orphan. And I saw this, and I found this poem, and I think it is so fitting because it reflects so many aspects to the idea of what this author, Edgar Guest, calls living orphans. Orphans. Listen to this. When we think of orphans only as little girls and lads who haven't any mothers and who haven't any dads, they are grouped with other children in groups they're put to bed. with some stranger paid to listen while their little prayers are said. All the grown-ups look with pity on such lonely children small, and declare to be an orphan is the saddest fate of all. But sometimes I look about me with sorrow hanging my head as I gaze on something sadder than the orphans of the dead. For more pitiful and tragic as the long days come and go are the orphans of the parents they're not allowed to know. They're the orphans of the living, left alone to romp and play, from their fathers and their mothers by ambitions shut away. They have fathers who are busy, so weighted down with cares, that they haven't time to listen to a little child's affairs. They have mothers who imagine life could be given them if with something richer, something better than the joys of motherhood. So their children learn from strangers, and by strangers' hands are fed, and the nurse, for so much money, nightly tuck them into their bed. Lord, I would not grow so busy that I cannot drop my task to answer every question which that child of mine may ask. Let me never serve ambition here so selflessly, I pray, that I cannot stop to listen to the things my children say. For whatever care besets them, let them know I'm standing by. I don't want to make them orphans until the day I come to die. It's so rich, isn't it? We go about our lives so busy, feeling like we're providing and doing what we need to do, that we ignore those very important times. And so we look at the orphans, don't we? We see orphans and we're saddened because they're not going to have a father. But you see, I felt an orphanage, and I looked and I saw my friends and those who had their parents, they had their dad. And it was both ways, though. I saw one, how they didn't respect or love their father, and the way their fathers were not engaging with them. And I thought, how angry, and I got so angry because I felt so cheated. Now, that's just my grief and what caught me up. But as I redirected myself and thinking about fathers, I just feel like I got to bring this out to those fathers that are still there. And I want to ask you the question, are your children orphaned? And I want you to be honest, because it's never too late until it's too late to stop now. And I'm going to hand it to you. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of times as a dad myself, I just wish I would have thought of this and taken duct tape and just put them up against the wall sometimes, just to kind of, it just gets so overwhelming, and we make bad choices. And one of the things that as well, again, plan, but it's because our fathers and the way their fathers raised them and their fathers raised them. And I look at my grandfather, and I look at those who went through World War II and the experiences that they had, the horrific things they saw, witnessed, and that shaped them into the parent and the father that they became. And then my father, who was then shaped by that father. And so there's a lot of things when they came back, was raised like, was shaped by the environment he was in, but that a lot of times it's really out of our control. And it's hard to not mimic what we have been exposed to ourselves. My father was very quiet, didn't hug a lot, he didn't say I love you a lot, but I knew it. So guess what? My kids, I don't hug a lot, couldn't tell them I loved them a lot, couldn't express my emotions. And it took a lot to figure that out. And I sometimes still look back and think, I'm still struggling to reconcile it and think, well, what? God, that's not the way God created me. And I'm not blaming my dad, because that's the environment in which he was brought up. And that's why it's so important for us to kind of look at the way God had created what he wanted from us and kind of rebalance ourselves and come back and try to achieve what we can of the way God intended for us to be as fathers. But in the Bible, I picked out the ones I want to pick out and pick on, but I tried to look at the worst and the best of fathers. And so as I looked at it, there's some that just kind of jump out at you right away, and you'll probably relate to them. But the first one that I think of is Eli. Eli was a priest, a man of God, serving in the temple. He was a prophet as well. He wasn't an absentee father. He was there. His children, his sons became priests themselves and went around and were helping to administer God's righteousness. But they didn't. They actually became worse than the people they were ministering to. They were taking and they were cheating. They were having illicit relationships. And even when Eli and told him, he kind of rebukes him, but and that came back, and God brought a judgment against him for that. And then, if you remember, there was Hannah in the same timeline where Eli was serving that wanted a child so bad. And she was being kind of neglected by her husband, and she prayed so diligently to want a child, that to the point where she said, Lord, if you give me a child, I'll give it back. And the Lord blessed her, and she was blessed with a son, and his name was Samuel. And Samuel, she then, after he was weaned, so we're talking 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know back then how soon they weaned him, she takes Samuel to the temple and turns him over to Eli. You'd think, well, Eli, you got a second chance. So Samuel is raised in the temple, but Samuel was not a good father either. Now, I'm not going to say that these men were an abomination. This is one aspect, okay, of their life. I'm not going to cast a judgment on them, because we know that there were things that Eli did that was good, and he had to deal with that with God. And then Samuel, this guy, we have a whole lot more amazing things that he did, but when it comes to being a parent, he was not any better as a parent at all. And this is the man who definitely had the courage that when he commanded Saul, and he told Saul, you need to go down and attack the Amalekites, and you need to wipe them out. You need to destroy them all. You need to burn all the livestock, destroy everything. Saul failed to do that. He back. And whenever Samuel comes along, he goes up and he goes, what is that? Is that sheep I hear? He goes, well, yeah. And Saul goes, yeah, well, we brought back the best, And he goes, and so he brings out King Agag. And he's like, what? Samuel kills him right in front of Saul. He stood. But because of his failure of his children, Israel cried out and said, we want a king, just like everybody else. We want a king. Well, you see, the whole problem was Samuel knew they had a king. He was God. So God said, let him have a king. So Samuel. Then we come to an individual that we see as a young man that had this heart that God had seen, and that he identified him from out in the pasture, all by himself. And God says, Samuel, I want you to go and anoint another king. I'm done with Saul. And he goes there and he goes to the family. God says, that's the family. And so he tells the father, he goes, bring your sons out here. And he brings out these amazing looking men, young boys, and he goes, nope, that's not it. God says, nope, that's not him. And Samuel's like, God's talking to him while he's looking at these boys trying to find his king. And God says, no. And so Samuel goes, is there another one? He goes, yeah, but he's out there with the sheep. That's how important he was. But God is thinking. And he says, go get him. So they go and get David, bring him in, and Samuel anoints him as a future king. And God describes him later on through the Psalms that he was a man after my heart. He was a king of kings. He's the king that even to this day, the Jews want to establish a kingdom around his reign. He was one that went through all sorts of things that you'd say, and he had the wisdom and the love and the respect for God that even when he had an opportunity to kill the king and take over, and everybody, even the guys in the cave with him, said, kill him. That guy has done nothing but pursue you. He goes, no, I will not kill God's anointed. Pursued for nearly 20 years. Took care of the people of Israel when the king himself would not do it. He would come out of hiding and go and protect the people when the Philistines would come in and raid. He was an amazing person. But he was a horrible father. Horrible. I mean, it's the most disappointing aspect of David that I have on him of all. I mean, when he starts to rule and he has his children, we find this mess going on with his family. One stepbrother rapes the other daughter, stepdaughter. Then this hatred builds up. Absalom rises up. And I keep asking the question as you go through that story and you look at it, you have to keep going, where is David? Where is David in this? Why did he not do something when his daughter was raped? Why did he not do something to that son? He does nothing. And then Absalom raises up. And he ends up going off and living with his Gentile dad, a grandpa who was ungodly, raised by him. And then Absalom comes back and he immediately starts to undermine his father. He goes down to where you would call the city council at the gate where the rulers were, and he was a good-looking guy too. Remember his hair? He said, man, he cut it once a year and it weighed like a pound. I mean, just this statue of a man. And he'd go down there and he'd sit around and he'd go, man, I tell you what, if I was king, this wouldn't be happening. And he raises up a rebellion to the point where David has to flee Jerusalem because his own son is going to kill him. And then after he comes and the rebellion is put down, Absalom now is on the run. He comes back and he's there and news killed. Joab, his own general, said, I killed him. And David weeps. You see, even though that's another aspect of a father that we need to understand. Where was he before? But I'll tell you where he was after. He was brokenhearted. And you don't get over that. And you can't undo it. So I can't put him up there. I have to put him on one of the worst dad lists. But the worst got to be Manasseh. This guy, this king, he had one of the most righteous fathers, most godly fathers there was. This man not only just destroyed and ran down the temple, but allowed pagan worship to occur in the temple. He then also brought statues and built statues to all these Moloch and these other gods. He even sacrificed one of his own children to Moloch by fire. Now, let's not forget the other side of him as well. So he is taken by the Babylonian king by hooks as a prisoner. and led away, as God had said, because of his unrighteousness and how evil he was. But he repented while he was in captivity, and he prayed to God. And God put him back as king. Never before. If you look at his ever, the word, but with that God put him back. David, as a father. You can't come back and backtrack and fix a lot of the things that we fail to do now as a parent. Now, when it comes to good fathers, again, like I said, just some of the ones that I thought were just jumped out at me was one that's very obscure character in the Bible. And the reason is because he's not a Jew. He's a Rechabite, Jonadab. Very few remember this guy. There's a lot of characters in the Bible, you read about that are kind of like little secondary characters to the main. But he comes along in the timeline of Ahab. Remember him? Jezebel. They were kings and rulers, the queen of the 10 northern tribes. And what we find is that Jehu then turns and starts to kill and destroy the house of Ahab. This one person comes along, a non-Jew, a Rechabite, that Jonadab rises up and stands with Jehu and goes through and helps him. Now, that's not the important part. The important part that we're revealed through the scripture is that his children, how faithful they were, and that he had commanded them, which means he taught them. Yet he wasn't a Hebrew, but yet we find this little story telling us about how he was managing his children, to the point that generations later, that we find Jeremiah talks about the discipline of his sons that were living then when Jeremiah, before the final fall. And he commends them, and he's almost using it, and it's insulting. I think we miss this part, because he's almost taking ungodly, you'd say, father, and telling the Hebrews, that is a good man. Look at his children. And he was commending him. So we see that. Jonadab was one. I think the greatest one that we see, and we don't have a name of him because he's just called, we hear him in the story of the prodigal. But I think it wraps them all up, because I could go through more. But I think that I just kind of skipped right to the prodigal, because in that we know that it was a parable. But parables are teaching truths about either God, the kingdom, or relationships in the kingdom. And in this one, we see God as Father. And this is where we got to go. If we talked about the problem we have today, if we want to try to bring ourselves back to have this peace and try to bring this order and love back into our families, into our future generations, is that we really got to look at him as Father. And some of the things that we see about him, it's summed up, and I took these verses, it's over in chapter 15. But just the response. We know the story of the prodigal, how he was one of those kids that dad doesn't know anything, dad's really dumb. Before he could get to the point where he goes, dad's got a good idea. And before he could get to the point where he goes, you know what, let's ask dad. Before he got to any of that, he goes, Dad, give me my inheritance. And God, and the father gives it to him. And he goes off and does what? Squanders it, gets to the point where he's eating. He wishes he could eat the food of the pig. Finally, he matures and goes, I got to go home. And, this is the way us fathers need to be. And it's hard. It's really hard sometimes. If you have a child that disobeys you, rebels against you at the level like this man did, this young boy did, he devastated his entire family financially. It's not like today where you have a son or a daughter that just rebels and leaves the house and goes and lives their own way. This was huge. You see, because when the father died, everything about the future of that family depended upon the amount of inheritance that was built up to the point of the father dying. When the father died, the inheritance then was distributed among the family. So in other words, it's like a savings account or your 401k. If you break when you're 20 years old or 30, it's gone. Start another one, but guess what? It'll never be the same because you wiped out that 1K and it no longer has that potential to continue to build. So this family, financially, emotionally, in many ways, was never going to recover. And if you were a modern father, you were there, you would see the lasting impact that it was going to have on your family. And as parents, that's what we see sometimes. We become so father. Look what he says. While he was still a long way off. In other words, he didn't wait till he got there. He saw him and he felt what? Compassion. Fathers, wait. Don't wait. Be always ready. Now, you notice one thing I want to clarify. He did not travel over and go get him away from that pigsty. Because he also understood he's going to have to figure this out. But as soon as he was understanding and he came, he received him. You notice he doesn't also wait for him to apologize, explain himself, or anything. Lesson learned. You don't need to rub it in, dads. Most of the times, when they're at this point, they get it. What do you need to do? You need to have compassion. Because in a little way, we've all been right there like him, right? The other thing we see was going, not only did I just forgive you, but I receive you back in the Oriental custom that you're back, you're whole. You notice, as you read this, the prodigal's still pushing back. His whole mindset is, I'll just serve as a servant. No inheritance, I'll just serve. I'll be better off. But he's getting full restoration. What do you think how that relationship was years later? Man, that young man was probably the best young man, best son, grew up to be an upstanding father himself, understanding and learning from his father as well. He gives him the best, and he says, let's celebrate. Now, you know the story of the prodigal, really, this is a little part of it. It's an important part, but what always seems to be minimized is the other brother. Do you remember him? How did he deal with it? When he heard that they were slaughtering the fatted calves and lambs and preparing a party, he became bitter. He was upset. He was that 20-year-old going, Dad's dumb. Dad's out of fashion. He doesn't know what's going on. His brain's still not developed enough. He's not there yet, is he? And he refused to participate. What did Dad do? He didn't get mad at him. He went out there and he gave him a teaching moment. That later on, when he finally got to the age where he goes, you know what? Let's wait a minute. Let's talk to Dad moment. He gave him a moment of teaching and showing him, you know what? My son was dead. And now I've received him back. And later on, when that bitter son was going to have his own son and be in that situation, it was going to change him as well. He could have ignored him. He could have yelled at him. He could have done a lot of stuff. But that was Israel in receiving all of God's children. That was the thing. The prodigal son here, his father is God. We are one or the other. We're either with him as a Christian, and sometimes we look at those who are not Christians, that when they receive them, how do we bring them in our family? It's all about family, isn't it? It all comes back around. But the foundation has to come to teaching. We have to teach. And we teach in a lot of ways. A lot of times, when somebody says, well, they must be a teacher, a lot of times the qualifications for like an elder and stuff, they must be able to teach. Well, and you say that in a church, and you'll say, well, he's got to be able to stand up here and teach a class in public and things like that. I learned a lot from my dad. He taught me a lot by me just watching. Just watching. How he would do things, working on a truck. I saw a lot. He taught a lot. And it wasn't just Bible, it was life. So many things that we have to start. The proverb writer says in 29:17, he says, discipline your son and he will give you rest. He will give you delight on your heart. When I read that last night, I thought about what's going on and how many children out there now are giving such torturous nightmares to parents. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm trying to show you how God said you teach your children. Yes, we need to teach them moral values that God teaches and bring them up in a godly way. But if we don't, what does the proverb say? Now, proverbs are proverbial. They're not absolutes, okay? Because I hear a lot of times, somebody will say a proverb and say, like, it's an absolute. If you do it exactly like that, it'll always be that way. They're proverbial. They're not absolutes. Why are they not absolutes? Because of sin. Because we deviated somehow. But there's so much broken parents. And I can't help but think of this proverb. Were the children taught? And it kind of hits home. Again, when we change what God has designed, we get chaos. We get torturous moments in our lives. Now, this one's always thrown around in Proverbs 22:6. And I got this one thrown at me by an older Christian when I didn't whoop my kids enough. Thank you very much for that advice, anyway. No, I'm serious. I used to sit, we took the pew out, but I sat back there with my 3 little rascal sons. And some of you remember them. They could get in trouble. I mean, they just try to hold them still for a second. And one Sunday morning, after services, I had a man walk up to me afterwards and look me in the eye and say, doesn't that boy know the end of a stick, whooping? And I thought to myself, and I didn't know what to say. I was so taken back. But he didn't see me take him out 3 times and whoop him because he sat up front. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Right? You feel that? You see why I don't mind if your kids are here screaming and crying and doing whatever? Because I kind of matured a little and I saw what the other side of that was. So that's why when we say that, train up a child in the way that he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. I've had this actually told back to me by my sons now that they're older, because this is what I would tell them when they got into those rebellious ages where I wasn't a smart guy and I was old-fashioned and I was all those different statements. I'd look at them and I'd say, you know what, but I ruined you. Now, according to their standards, I ruined you. And they're like, why? I said, because I put God in your heart and you can't get him out. He's in there. And no matter what he did, it's almost like, they do bad things and stuff, but they had this line they would not cross. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? You had this certain level of rebellion and bad behavior, but it was like they'd bump against it, but they would pull over. It's like, okay, I know I'm doing wrong, but even they had. And where'd they get that line at? They got it because I tried to put God in their hearts. So I ruined them because they would not go the extra step that their friends were doing. Oh, they would travel along with them pretty good. There was a point where they'd say, whoa. And now I have them telling me back, says, yeah, you ruined us. I said, yeah, and you're pretty good men now. You're still ornery. You're still not perfect. You're still doing some things I don't like. But they're good men. They're good men. So that's why I say that this is a proverb. And I'll give you a living example. My grandparents, they had 6 children. One was killed in the war. All of them had become Christians. And then all of them, except for 2. So the majority of his children fell away from the church and never went back. And it broke my grandpa's heart. I remember. He just felt like he had just failed so miserably. Did you know my aunt was baptized at 80? And her husband, that I thought, no way, he is so ornery, he was baptized. Where did they get that? Where did that come from? All of his children, except for one, came back to the Lord. Did he live to see it? No, he didn't. So I'm telling you that as well as a parent, is never, never give up. Never give up as a father and just think, oh, that's it, they're done. They're never gonna be good again. Because I saw that. And as I saw that happening, and as I saw those coming back to the Lord like that, I was just like, there's the proverb. Train the child in the way of the Lord. And it's in them. And they'll know where to come back. They'll know where to come back. That's why in Deuteronomy, God taught the Jews and teaches us today. He said, these are the words which I command you today. They shall be in your heart. Not beaten out, not something that's disciplinary type of dictate. In the heart means that it's there and accepted emotionally, spiritually. Mosaic law, and we think how rough it is, how cold it was. God says, I want it on their hearts, something that's meaningful. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And we do that not just, it doesn't mean walk around and just book, chapter, verse them. But you say it in the way you live, the way you talk to them. You can teach a lot of spiritual, righteous truth just by the words and the conversations you're having. They're expressing God's morality and God's plan of salvation just by the way we talk, the way we view things. We're teaching them, and we rise up when we go. And the last and greatest thing, honestly, is like we looked at some of those fathers. This is what Roy Lessman said: the imprint of the father remains forever on the life of the child. That shape, they have free will. So I honor you, fathers. You got a big job. And it never ends, does it? Never ends. And then, the grandfather side, I thought it was like kind of like a status level, like, now I'm grandpa, it's like really cool. And no, man, it's like father twice. Now I got to father the father and then the child, it's like, and then I watch them doing the stuff I do, and it's a good thing, I think, that we get older to where we can look at them and have more compassion for our children as they're raising their children. But grandkids, your grandparents are still fathers. They're still mothers. They still love you, and they're still going to want the best for you. And it doesn't also mean you stop teaching. The strongest part of my faith came from my grandfather. My grandfather. So even though he may not have even known it, it had that influence on him. But let's talk now something a little more personal, and that has to do with your salvation, your personal relationship with God, because he is the greatest father. He is that father of the prodigal that's waiting for us to come back, ready with open arms, to run to you and to receive you back, to kiss you, to show you that compassion. He has done everything he can. But sometimes people are more comfortable, like the prodigal was, away, splurging our inheritance, living among the filth. And he's waiting. And he's waiting. And he's prepared everything for you. He has given the ultimate sacrifice to where you can have your sins forgiven and be restored in a relationship with him. What a Father we have. And fathers, that's who we need to look at. What would your Father, Heavenly Father, do? And he would give his own life for you. And he did. He gave life, the best to us. So this morning, I hope that if you're not with your Father, the ultimate Heavenly Father, in the right relationship, I hope that you'll think about these things. We're going to sing this song, and it's a very personal time for you to evaluate how you're living with God. And if there's something that we can do to help you, either establishing that relationship or strengthen that relationship, I hope you'd let us know while we stand and sing.
While through his word he calls you, come, sinner, come. While we are praying for you, come, sinner, come. Now is the time to want him, come, sinner, come. Now is the time to know him, come, sinner, come. Are you too heavy laden? Come, sinner, come. Jesus will bear your burden. Come, sinner, come. Jesus will not deceive you. Come, sinner, come. Jesus can now redeem you. Come, sinner, come. Oh, hear his tender pleading. Come, sinner, come. Come and receive the blessing. Come, sinner, come. While Jesus now invites you, come, sinner, come. While we are praying for you, come, sinner, come. Please be seated. Just a few